So Emily, maybe just give us a quick background on yourself, and then we'll jump into the OKRs and how they're used.
Sure. So I spent about 10 years as an academic scientist. I joined 23andMe 9 years ago when the company was about 30 people. We mostly had scientists and engineers and no other departments at that time. So I've been with the company through a lot of growth. I oversee business development, corporate development, and alliance management, work really closely with Anne, do a lot of fundraising, et cetera. So it's been quite a ride.
Great. How many people in the audience know what OKRs stand for? That's about half. So it stands for Objective and Key Results. This is probably be more depressing. How many of you use OKRs at your companies?
Better than I would have thought.
No, we don't. Yeah, great. So tell us a little bit about the OKR philosophy at 23andMe.
Yeah, so the goal of OKRs is really about alignment and focus and transparency. And so the concept is trying to get everyone rowing in the same direction, like setting out this is what's important for the business, and making sure that people, we're going to do this, we're not going to do that. And then being really transparent with the entire company that these are what the goals are. And it's been interesting, 23andMe is a pretty, I would describe us as having a somewhat rebellious culture. And so we tried OKRs maybe 6 or 7 years ago when the company was a lot smaller. And there's a lot of connections with Google and other great organizations that are using OKRs. So we were familiar, we understood the virtues, and we made sort of a half-hearted attempt at doing OKRs, and it didn't stick. For a variety of reasons, and we've just come back to them at the end of 2017, and so it's been really transformational to see that process.
Dig into that. So why didn't it stick?
I think for a lot of reasons we weren't totally bought in. I think we had a little bit of a belief that we were still small and that OKRs, the process would be so rigid as to prevent us from being nimble, and we valued being nimble a lot. And we set some goals. I don't think we were great at setting super measurable goals. We were definitely not great at the diligence that's required around like quarterly review of those goals. We kind of didn't have infrastructure in place, and so we set some goals, and then it didn't really stick, and nobody was like, oh yeah, I guess we set some goals, and then we just kept moving on with the other things we were doing.
So how did you decide then just to give up on them, and then what made you come back?
I don't think we ever decided to give up on them. It just happened because we didn't decide to really stick to it. And the company did fine. We certainly had goals. And I think when you're a company of 100 people, like you can get away with not having as formalized of a system, but the company scaled a lot. Like if you look just in the last couple of years, we've more than doubled our employee base. We're now 650 employees. So I feel like around the time of about 400 people, we started having some challenges where you'd realize like, oh, hey, marketing is working on this project. They've been working on it for 2 months. They think it's really important, but it's actually not really aligned with what the rest of the exec team thinks is important, and it gets killed. And that's a painful process. It burns a lot of calories for the company. And so that's when there was this new openness, and I think a realization that we were big enough now, and we had big goals, and we really needed to be unified.
So tell me about some of the OKRs you tried setting up when you were small, and then when you got bigger and really embraced it, what you set up and how they differed.
Yeah, some of the when we were smaller, I think, and just like a little bit for those of you that aren't as familiar with OKRs, so in a, kind of a genericized example, the objectives are supposed to be aspirational, they're supposed to inspire people and unify people, they're what you want to achieve. So you could say, my objective is that I want to be healthy, and then the key results are supposed to be measurable and time-bound. They define how you're going to get to that objective. So you could say, my objective is I want to be healthy, and my key result 1 is that I'm going to exercise 3 days a week for an hour each time, and I'm going to eat vegetables, 2 servings of vegetables 5 days a week. And those things you can absolutely measure if you did them, and they should be in service of that larger goal. And so there's a real art when you're talking. It's easy to do that for something like being healthy, but when you're talking about a complicated technology company that does a lot of different things. We weren't great at setting goals initially. Like we kind of had the big vision, like we want to disrupt healthcare. But how do you how do you measure that? Like how do you actually set out how you're going to do that? And so I think we were kind of big on the ideas in the early phase, and when we've come back to OKRs, we only as a company have 5 top-line objectives. That's it. Those objectives are typically around like revenue and sales. We have objectives around product and having an awesome product, objectives around the like scaling and growth and culture, and then specific key results that are very measurable underneath each of those things.
And who sets the OKRs? Is it Anne? Is it you and Anne? How do you do that?
We set them as an executive team. We come together. The first time we did it, it took a lot of time to sort of align around what are those high-level goals and what are the things we're doing, what are the things we're not doing. So I would say that first cycle is a pretty big time investment, and we typically do that at the end of the year. We set this as like a year-long process. So in December, we meet and say like, okay, what are the objectives for next year? Once you've done it once, then the objectives are sort of a variation on a theme. But we do it as an executive team, and then we meet with our teams, they kind of roll up and roll down. So we say, all right, this is what we think the company objectives should be. We meet with our teams and get buy-in and get additional feedback, and then start setting the KRs and making sure that those things are measurable. And I'd say the objectives really get set by the execs. The KRs have a ton of input from a larger group across the company, because these are the folks that are going to be responsible for making sure that we, hit sales numbers, that we hit data numbers, et cetera.
And then when you set the key result, the objectives I get, the executive team is looking at you do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
Then you go to your team. When you set the key results, are you setting it at a probability of 50% hitting it, probability of 90%? And does that tie into promotions or compensation?
Yeah.
How does that influence how these are set?
Yeah, these are great questions. So I think the proper way that OKRs are done, the goal in A+ is a 0.7, is a 70%. So we do commit goals and stretch goals. So say, I'm making something up, say we had a revenue goal and we said the revenue goal is $100 million. If you got to $100 million, you get a 0.7, and you'd set a stretch goal of $150 million, and that would give you a 1. And so then you total up across all of your KRs and you average that number, and the goal is that you're getting a 0.7. If you do that and you average to a 1, it means that you're sandbagging and you're not setting aggressive enough goals. And this is something that actually with a culture like ours resonates really well. We, the first year that we really set OKRs and stuck with it, we set a sales goal that was more than 3 times greater than the sales we'd had the previous year. And everyone in the company kind of guffawed and was like, this is insane. We can't, are you kidding? We can't do this. And Anne was very resolute, nope, this is the number. We're going to strive. We're going to see, we're going to do, we've set it, and we're going to do all we can. And we ended up actually exceeding that number. And I think because there was this momentum, people bought in, we made a plan. It was really transformative. And the second part of your question, people's pay is not tied to their performance on OKRs. So there's a really firm division between, we set these goals, they're aspirational. With some of them, we've had OKRs where we take a 0, or they come, there's a project that we set on OKRs this year, and we decided mid-year, we're not going to do this, and it just kind of gets taken off.
So then what are the consequences? The consequences of success are clear.
Yeah.
Right? What are the consequences of not hitting the 0.7 or whatever you said?
Yeah, I think it's felt demoralization in a way. It's mostly, oh God, we set a goal and we didn't hit it. And I think that feels bad when that happens. But performance is managed through a separate process, kind of a more traditional performance evaluation that's looking at how you're doing, but it's divorced from, hey, you set an ostentatious goal and you didn't meet it, so now we're going to dock your pay.
Got it. Do you then do quarterly check-ins?
We do.
And is that, well, let me ask the first question. When you decide and you do the roll-up with the team, how is it communicated to the broader company at whole, and maybe the check-ins along the way?
I think this this is one of the things that's cool about OKRs that has been interesting to experience from inside 23andMe. Like when I started at the company, I knew literally every single person. I knew the names of their kids. Like it was very small, and now there are many, many, many people that I don't know anymore. And so OKRs has been a way that it feels like everyone has visibility into what the executive team thinks is important. And there have been moments where we've debated like, wow, is this risky to put out this much information? But so what we do is we have an all-hands meeting every Friday, and every quarter we set that up as an OKR town hall where we have a slide deck that we go through just for the company level, and we go through each of the 5 company objectives and then all of the key results under those and what the score was and why, and then what we're looking for in the next quarter. And we've iterated on this over time. We also have department OKRs. We don't surface those up in kind of an all-hands format because it takes too long, although employees have access. So everyone in the company has access. They can see all the BD teams, all the engineering teams. So you can really see like what people are doing. And I think as companies scale, there's this intense cross-functionality. Like my team specifically, we're doing a BD deal. I need engineering resources. I need product resources. I need to make sure that legal has staff. It's really cross-functional. And the OKRs force making sure that people are resourced appropriately and that we're all saying yes to the same thing. And conversely, we're saying no, that there are other things that we're kicking off the list and saying like, hey, we're not resourced for that.
When you brought it back, there must have been some resistance. There must have been some people who were like, no way, we're doing well, or this is, how'd you deal with that?
I think there's always resistance to change. In this case, I do think having the top really bought in and was like really ready to do it, and that was really important. And we had John Doerr come to 23andMe. We were fortunate in that, and like he came and he spoke and he gave lots of examples of the Googles of the world that used OKRs and the wonderful things that happened to their business, and so that was helpful. I know that's not a possibility for all companies, but it was definitely helpful to kind of set the tone, and then to really stick with it. Like we have a person on Anne's staff who is dedicated to running OKRs. And so she sets up the mid-quarter check-ins, the quarterly reviews. She leads all of that. It's in the calendar, and that has also helped because I feel like for the exec team, it's, the managing of the nuts and bolts of the process is not something that we all want to be spending a ton of our own time on.
That's great. So there's actually a full-time dedicated person working for the CEO who's implementing and working on that.
I mean, she has other things she does in addition, but this is a core part of her job.
Do you involve the board or the investors at all in the OKRs?
Yeah, we do. So every board meeting, we present the company objectives and the scoring. We used to kind of run through it with the board. Now it's mostly in the appendix, but they have a full visibility. And that's how it should be, right? Like the things that are in the OKRs are what are driving the business and what the board it should reflect what the board cares about anyway. And this is kind of a nice formalized way for them to see like, oh wow, you guys missed these 3 things, but you did well here. It's really kind of easy, quick grading that they can check.
So now if you rewind it back 8 years, given the success you've had with the OKRs, and most people in this audience are going to be less than 100 employees. What's your advice to them? Should they start with OKRs? Should they wait at a certain point?
I think OKRs are outstanding. I think they're transformative. I wish we had started them earlier because I think one of the challenges for maybe all companies, but especially young companies, when you are resource constrained, is what to say no to. And it's something that we've struggled with a lot. And OKRs force that in an effective way where you can kind of say like, the meta goal is this. And so we've got these 5 things we're committing to. Here's this other cool, shiny, fun thing that we'd like to take on. Is it worth kicking one of these things off the list? And we didn't have we had those conversations, but they weren't as formalized. And so I do think that starting OKRs young is a good thing.
Any specific examples? You talked about the sales number. Any specific examples you can give us to crystallize how important they shaped your decision?
Yeah, I mean, we had another big focus for us was on the product, and so we have a ancestry and a health DNA test. People can get their personal genetic information from 23andMe. So, for instance, in 2018, one of our objectives was around getting approval from the FDA to be able to tell customers their risk for Alzheimer's disease. This is something we knew customers really wanted. We were keen to bring it back into the product, and so we had it as like a second quarter objective, get approval from the FDA. And so there was a lot of work that we could do. We had to, pull together a lot of data, file our submission, and then it was out of our hands. The FDA had a period of time to review it, and in that quarter, the FDA, we didn't hear back in the quarter, and so we got a 0 for the OKR. We grade harshly. We didn't get like a 0.5 because we submitted. We got a 0. We didn't get FDA approval. And then 5 days into the next quarter, we got approval from the FDA, and it was a huge win, and it felt like the whole company was rallied around it. The fact that we had set, and when we set that OKR, it felt too aggressive. Like, there's no way we're going to get approval from this so fast. And so it was a great kind of example of like how setting those goals, kind of ostentatious goals, can sort of force you to be better or to like move faster than you thought you could.
23andMe made a, it's on? Hello? Okay, well, I can speak loud. 23andMe made a big change from being solely consumer test to going to pharmaceuticals, and that you hired some great people and raised a bunch of money for that. Did OKRs play a role at all? 'Cause that's a big pivot.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so 23andMe, now it's been, 4 years ago, brought on Richard Scheller from Genentech and launched essentially a biotech inside the company. So we have this consumer business where we sell DNA tests. Our customers can opt into research. 80% of them do. We now have 10 million customers. We have 2.5 billion health data points about those customers. So it's an enormous data set that you can mine for research purposes. And when we decided to launch a therapeutics group, which was exciting and in many ways kind of aligned to the mission of the company from the ages, from the beginning of time. And so therapeutics is now a really core part of the OKR process. The time horizon for what they're doing is longer. Developing a drug is like a 10 to 15 year endeavor. But there are a lot of proximal points along the way, and I think what's been important for us is in some ways, a business like that can feel so different than our core consumer business. Like, it's in a different building. They have very different needs. They have very different capital needs. So, like, how do you integrate those things together? And the OKRs help us with that because, like, the core 23andMe infrastructure, we need customers, we need data, we need to structure that data so that we can push it over here to therapeutics. So that gets reflected in the engineering OKRs and the marketing OKRs. They kind of feed into what's happening in therapeutics, and then they are taking that data. They're responsible for finding targets, developing those targets. We're partnered with GSK on commercializing some of those things. And so they have, I think the OKR process has been really valuable there too. And frankly, for that group of people is more familiar to like the culture you would find in the Genentechs of the world.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have about 5 minutes for questions. I want to make sure people have a chance. So, Itamar?
Thanks. So I implemented the OKRs in 3 consecutive companies right now, and it's been transformative. So I'm a huge proponent, of course. But the 2 biggest pushback that I get from teams that don't have experience with OKRs in the past is the performance review. And it's like, do you really believe that if I do commit to a BHAG or something really, really hard to do, and I don't get it, that's not going to affect my performance, my compensation, stuff like that. So there's a level of just, do they believe in it? And if they don't, they will sandbag every time. And the second one is that there are different groups that are more gravitated towards it than others. And I think sales, for me, has always been hard. Like, they always say, I've got one OKR, it's very simple, it's a number. Anything else you're trying to do with them, they're just going to shut down and don't do. So How do you deal with that?
Yeah, those are good and hard questions. So one of the ways that we deal, like on the sales side, is the commit versus stretch. And that helps kind of draw a line between like setting the ostentatious aspirational goal versus like, this is what we're going to do. This is what's in the forecast to the board. We're going to meet this number. And so that has helped the difference between the commit and the stretch goal there. For us, and I don't know if some of this speaks to the size of company, like when we typically don't have individual performers setting objectives and key results. It's usually at the level of teams. So there's multiple people, right? There's like the company and then department and then teams. And that helps take the rub off from any one person that like, oh boy, you missed this, you failed, and somehow that's going to reflect poorly on your performance. We also do the performance reviews like somewhat kind of off cycle. We've actually changed how we do that now. Every team sets the cadence for when they do their performance evaluations, and they can choose like which quarter that happens in. And so that's also kind of helped, I think, like divorce the fear about your pay being affected by what's happening in OKRs. But I do think it's so important to embrace failure is going to happen. Of course, we are all trying to succeed, but if we create a culture where there's fear of failure, it doesn't benefit the company. And so I think that's something that we've done really well. We've had big OKRs where we've missed, and we've really taken that as something that we've learned from. And so I think having that tone at the top really helps.
I think, Jayanth, you had a question?
Excuse me, sorry.
It's on the same performance. How do you assess somebody with an OKR? Could you do the flip where if they miss, then say like, hey, you did your best, but it's okay, but still hold them accountable and tie their performance to their OKR? So I commit to this. If I do it, great. If I don't, then okay, you tried your best, still good, or you didn't try your best, bad. Like, I don't understand how you can divorce a performance with what I've committed to.
Yeah, I mean the grading. So with each of the KRs, like we grade them on a scale from 0 to 1, and you'll have KRs where it's like, oh, we got a 0.25 on this because a whole bunch of different things happened, and typically there's then a process of like, well, what happened? Maybe we deprioritized this. That's often one of them. Something else was more important, and we decided this wasn't as important, and we weren't going to do it, or we tried and we couldn't. We set a really, really ambitious goal and we couldn't meet it. But the culture at 23andMe, like that it's been so removed from how people are evaluated for their performance that it really hasn't. We haven't seen it. I have not seen it be an issue at all.
Got it. Vibhu?
Can you talk about OKRs and budgeting and the order and how that works?
Yeah, so usually we do the OKRs first, so we know what the goals are, and they drive budgeting in both directions. So they drive what the plan is, like this is the revenue that we believe that we'll generate, and that's in the OKRs from various different lines of business that are revenue generating for us. They also then drive resources, like for instance, we're going to do a whole new feature in our Ancestry product. Like that was one of the things we did this year. We have 1,000 regions in the Ancestry product, most comprehensive. That needed a bunch of headcount, and so by setting the OKRs, we could then say, all right, in order to resource this, when we do headcount planning, there's a column that says which KR is this. You need 3 more people on your team. Well, which KR is it tied to? And it really forces people to A, think those things through, and then B, make sure that they're advocating for resources that you're actually aligned to as a company. So it's helped a lot in that regard.
Great. Neil?
One of the things, and Jeff Bezos was here last year, and he talked a lot about measuring inputs versus outputs. Mm-hmm. And in the context of OKRs, like we use them, I think one of the challenges for us is how do you use them in a way that allows you to measure inputs and process without just being like retrospectively explaining away your failures. Because it's also really easy to set arbitrary goals, and you don't really know if the company is operating at efficiency.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
One of the things we've tried to be flexible. This is the first year that we were like back doing it for real and out of the dark ages. We set different goals every quarter, which was a little disjointed, although it gave us that kind of flexibility that I think we wanted. Like things change a lot quarter to quarter. This year we've set the objectives and the KRs are the same for the whole year. And what we've realized is that for about 80% of things that works, and the way you set them matters. So you really are thinking about like, okay, for us, one is data points, and like really how do we quantify that number of data points that we want? Do we have all the right stakeholders helping us think that through? But then there have been a handful, about 20% of things where we're almost halfway through the year and we've said, this isn't, like we got this wrong. And so we have a change log that gets presented to the whole company where it's either a number has to be revised or we had a project that we were thinking about launching and then decided not to launch it, and that gets revised. And so I think having some of that flexibility is important for us. It's hard in companies that are moving, so like a 12-month period of time is an eternity, and a lot can happen, and so you sort of do the very best you can at the beginning of the year with setting those things, and then that there is enough room to flex if you need that, and that you're always explaining to the company why, so that they understand we deprioritize. We're not going to stay with a project that management has decided isn't a good idea just to hit the OKR.
Vinod.
So I see a fair amount of confusion in talking about OKRs among the audience between a personal measurement system, how's this person or this team doing? Will it tie to my compensation? Those kinds of questions. As I understand it right from John Doerr, the objective was very different. It was to tell the whole company what the priorities are.
Exactly.
And as they move, to get the company to move with the objectives. So everybody knows of 3 things they can do, which is the highest priority. So it was much more messaging to the company about what's the highest priorities, not an evaluation system for a person or a team.
Exactly.
Could you comment on that?
Yeah, exactly.
This clarification is really important because companies don't know what their priorities are, and that was what OKRs originally invented at Intel achieved.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I think this is probably the number one barrier to launching OKRs is this fear around personal measurement and compensation and those things not being divorced. At 23andMe, it's been so important for us to have the prioritization set kind of from the top so we know, and we actually distill ours down to kind of 3 key words for the year. It's like scale, monetization, growth. Like those are the 3 things we're trying to do. And so you'll hear people in meetings kind of come back, like, how does this fit in with one of those themes? And that's really the purpose of OKRs, is to make sure that all of the different teams, that everyone's rowing in the same direction, that people understand what is important and what isn't important. And it's very removed from this concept of personal failure or like you didn't perform properly. It's really much more about like, what are we trying as a business to achieve this year? And if everybody in the entire company knows what the business is trying to achieve, we're much more likely to achieve it.
One last one, Gautam.
So we've implemented OKRs a few times now, like different versions of the matrix, to various different types of failure. But one of the things that I think we've struggled with is how frequently do you measure? In the beginning, we'd set quarterly OKRs and then measure them on a weekly basis, and you sort of talked about the morale issue. So you sort of set a bunch of OKRs and then you measure on a weekly basis and say, nope, didn't hit it this week, didn't hit it this week, didn't hit it this week. And of course, you're expecting to hit it by the end of the quarter. Can you comment on how frequently to measure and how frequently teams should be discussing their key results?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think it varies kind of company by company and team by team. We do it quarterly. Within my team, which holds a lot of the revenue goals, there is a more granular kind of eye to, like, we're not doing it weekly, but definitely monthly, like how are we tracking towards those goals? Because if we're 2.5 months into the quarter and we're a far way off, we're not going to be able to make that up. But kind of as as at the company level, we do we set them at the beginning of the quarter, like they're set within the first week of the quarter. Then we do a mid-quarter check-in, and it doesn't take that much time. We just did it on Monday. It took us 45 minutes. We go through the company. There's probably 30 KRs. We've red, yellow, greened them. There's an executive owner for each, and is it on track and needs work or way off track. And then you just focus on the kind of problem ones, and then we grade at the quarter. And that timing seems to work well for us. It was the first year. I think another hesitation with OKRs is it's just too time consuming. We all have day jobs. We can't be goal setting and stuff. We've gotten so much faster at it now that we have good infrastructure, and we have a spreadsheet. We've tried different systems of tracking. We found something that works, and so this now works, and it's very efficient.
So you basically say until you're measuring officially at the end of the quarter, you're going to do these quick check-ins where you say, are we on track or are we not on track?
Exactly.
It's simply yes or no, and that's it.
Yeah, red, yellow, green. And then that helps because so many of these things are cross-functional. It's this is off track because engineering hasn't had the resources to build the thing. And it's okay, well, let's recircle with engineering. We need to go ahead and prioritize that. Can we move some things around on the roadmap? So that quick kind of red, yellow, green really helps. And it also just gives visibility, which is the purpose of OKRs, so that even though my team is very removed from the build for something, they know because we need to know.
Great. Well, let's thank Conley really for coming. And